It's been a really good week for John Rustad and the BC Conservatives. In British Columbia politics, the NDP and David Eby were having to heavily rely on the idea that there was going to be a fight to the finish line between the BC Conservatives and BC United on who represents the anti-NDP voters the best. Obviously, it was going to be the BC Conservatives after some length of time. They were already way up in the polls, and despite having less seats in the legislature on the issues, voters agreed with them far more than they agreed with the United Party. But now it looks like John Rustad and the Conservatives have effectively vanquished United by taking their own caucus chair and having him defect over to their party. So the BC Conservatives went from 2 seats to 3 seats, with Lorne Doerkson moving over to their side of the aisle. This, in my opinion, basically means United's no longer a problem because over the past, couple weeks to a month, there's been open warfare between United and the Conservatives. It almost Kevin Falcon was trying to flex his muscles and show I'm still in the race. This is going to be a fight between me and John Rustad to see who's the real opposition leader to the NDP. It was not a useful debate, and the talks of a merger were obviously just rigged in order to try and make sure that the United Party still got to limp along and live past this next election. They should shut down as a party before this election. It's a worthless party, but with the Conservatives taking Lorne Doerkson to their side, it's effectively been decided that the Conservatives already won. If you were fighting really hard for 3 weeks trying to dig back support from the Conservatives, and the result of that is you lost an MLA to the Conservatives, no, you're done and people know it. And in fact, in a certain sense, at this point, it might be better that Falcon and the BC United Party stick around because there's no way that any federal Conservative Party voters are going to be voting for United. They're all going to vote for BC Conservatives. I couldn't imagine the sort of voter who votes for Pierre Poilievre or wants to vote for Pierre Poilievre federally, who then votes for United or, the NDP or the Greens. Obviously, there is almost going to be 100% vote transfer from the federal Conservatives to the BC Conservatives. And remember, the federal Conservatives in British Columbia are polling at 44% all the way up to 52%, depending on the poll you look at. That's all the BC Conservatives would need to be able to win a pretty good majority government. And they're about 6, 7, 8 points away from being within that range to be able to win. And that is easily surmountable. The NDP and David Eby, like I've said in so many past videos, have been moving, they've been kind of moving into this next election in this majority position purely off of political inertia because the opposition really hadn't sort of culminated behind the BC Conservatives enough. Well, there was enough voters who were going to vote NDP because I guess they're going to win anyways, and I want my MLA to be part of the government because, people inherently like the idea that if they call up their local constituency office, that person actually does represent the premier in their community rather than being someone opposed to them. That's no longer the case. It's no longer the case that you have to vote for the NDP if you want your MLA to be part of the government. The BC Conservatives can win. And when you look at the individual issue polling in British Columbia, nobody likes what David Eby is doing on the major issues that matter. The only issue David Eby is above water on, it's pretty pathetic. It's like, does your premier do a good job interacting with the federal government? Who cares? Justin Trudeau is not long for this world anymore on the federal level. Poilievre is obviously going to become the next prime minister of Canada. And so if you stick with Eby, if anything, within a year's time, you're going to have a premier who's going to be extremely combative with the person who's extremely popular to become prime minister. That's not a great look for British Columbia, and it's going to hold up needed reforms from the federal level trickling down into British Columbia. So having John Rustad as the BC premier is going to make sure that Pierre Poilievre can do his work federally, and you can get rid of all of the crazy policies David Eby's been forcing down the throats of British Columbians for the past 3-4 years. Decriminalization, SOGI 1, 2, 3, high taxes, high rates of crime, no crackdowns on crime at all. All this garbage can actually end. So I think the situation right now is United exists, but it's mostly just going to be pulling votes away from the Greens and the NDP because no one in their right mind who's voting federal Conservative in the next 2 months is still going to be saying they're voting for the United Party. And then I think that at this point, the Conservatives, the BC Conservatives, can just move on to focusing on smashing David Eby. They do not owe a response to Kevin Falcon and United. Again, they're completely dead. They have won this duel with them, and Lorne Doerkson is now part of their party. The United just lost their caucus chair. That's pretty pathetic. The fact that you lost your chair, a fairly high position in the party, prove that this is not just a party where backbenchers are trying to move over to it to get some more exposure. Lorne Doerkson did not have to struggle to get exposure in United. He was pretty prominent. And when you take a prominent MLA from United and have them cross the floor to Conservatives during the fight where Falcon is trying to establish himself as the real force against the NDP, you're done. You're done, but I hope you stick around because it's funnier if you guys do stick around. So at this point, there are polls showing that the NDP are still ahead of the Conservatives by 8 to 11 points. If anything, those polls are actually still really good news because if you followed the previous polls those firms did, I believe it was Angus Reid who had that plus 11 result for the NDP. The previous result they had was like plus 22 for the NDP. So things are improving. All pollsters have their own models, and some models change slower over time to meet with the new sort of geography of politics in the province. And so why I think what we're probably going to see is something a little bit closer to what Main Street has been showing, that the NDP and the Conservatives are going to be within the next 2 months in a statistical tie, and then it's going to become a turnout election. I believe by election day, the Conservatives can be well and above the NDP. I think they might have to be above them by 3 or 4% to be able to win, since the NDP does have their votes so concentrated in the Victoria and the Vancouver area. So if you live in British Columbia, I'm going to do the pitch and the spiel. They do not pay me to do this. I am not associated with BC Conservative Central Party Communications headquarters or whatever, but I still want to tell you guys, please donate to the BC Conservative Party. I have the donation link in the description below, or go and volunteer for them. Join a campaign, because what I always get annoyed with is when people see a terrible government in place, Justin Trudeau's federal Liberal government, or David Eby's BC NDP government, they say, well, it's hard, you can't change anything. The fact that they won last election proves that nothing can be done. And the thing is, the same people who say that stuff don't volunteer. They do not donate. They do not actually help out. You have to help out, or things do not get done. Obviously, nothing happens if you sit at home and don't do anything. You actually might have to risk standing up and leaving your house to actually engage in politics rather than just from behind a computer screen. And I say that from behind a computer screen, but I go out all the time, door knocking, doing social media campaigning, donating. I've donated to campaigns when I was effectively bankrupt. So if you have any chunk of change on you, you get a 75% tax credit back if you donate $100 in British Columbia. So it costs you $25 to give the BC Conservatives $100 so that they can hopefully get rid of the David Eby NDP and lower your taxes. You will save money if you donate to them. I know, I'm not trying to sound like desperate for the party. I just want people to take this stuff more seriously. That is kind of the whole thesis of my channel, for people to have a realistic view of politics, take it seriously, know how to communicate about politics, and know how they can take part in changing the country. So if you can donate to them, if you live in British Columbia, that's great. You can also donate to my legal fund in the description below. It's the Give, Send, Go link right there. And then you can also go check out my campaign website if you live in my riding of Calgary Signal Hill. I'm running for the Federal Conservative Party nomination, and the vote will probably happen before June 24th or on June 24th. So if you live in my riding, Calgary Signal Hill, make sure to mark me number 1 on your ballot so we can have a real conservative representing a very blue riding. Have a good one.